Hi folks, John Dunn here, RPG freelancer, publisher behind Melia. I'm up here today at Immortals with Mikey.
What is up, John? How's it going?
You know, it's a little hot and humid outside today.
Feels like Vegas in the wintertime.
A little bit. This is not my ideal.
I know, it's bad.
We're down here in the air conditioning, at least for the moment, as long as the power holds out.
I know. Who would have thought a dungeon had AC,
It's a good deal.
I know.
All right, all the pleasures of modern terror, right?
21st century.
There you go. And today I thought we would talk about something a little more serious and grim and maybe old.
Right. Because when do we not? When do we not talk about those things?
I don't always touch on all those topics. But we got a rather hefty tome here today called Zweihänder, Grim and Perilous RPG. This is really the creation of Daniel Fox, the developer behind it. He started out working on it kind of as an OSR project in the early 20-teens, brought it to Kickstarter in 2016 and raised about 60 grand on it. And then the book came out in 2017. In 2018, it won the Gold Ennie right here.
Nice.
Got printed on the back of that there.
Another Anywhere.
For both the best game and the product of the year. And Carlos recently picked up this one and a few expansions for it. So we've got them up here on the shelf. Thought maybe I could talk about it a little bit since then. Now, this did kind of start out as a retro clone of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Do you know what a retro clone is?
Is it kind of like inspiration, or is it like an exact clone? Is it what it sounds like?
Well, it's kind of what it sounds like. Here's the thing. With game rules, copyright law does not extend to game rules. They do extend to the expression of the rules. So if I write out that in order to play blackjack, you have to hit exactly 21, which obviously is not right, but you have to hit exactly 21 on 2 or 3 cards. And somebody could then clone those rules by saying your cards have to add up to 21. Right, so it's just the exact same rules, just expressed with slightly different terminology.
Just paraphrase a little bit.
Yeah, paraphrasing it, rewriting it, even though it's the same meaning, changes the copyright.
Okay.
Because that's the way that game rules are copywritten.
Loopholes.
Yes, it's very much a loophole. Because of that, if anybody wants to make their own version of an existing game, they can just rewrite those rules in that same way, make sure they're not stringing the exact same words together in the same order. That's kind of how we have a lot of different variants of Dungeons and Dragons, just for instance.
Yeah.
Because they change the verbiage around a little bit, and that's enough.
Yeah, it was a good way of explaining it. I get that.
So this kind of started out as a retro clone of first edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, but it has departed pretty significantly from that. It does also include a lot of expansion material that was in source books that weren't in the core rulebook, and that's why this is a 670-ish page volume. Yeah, so this is a hefty book. It's going to take you a little while to get through all of it. Took me a little while just to kind of, get through enough of it to be able to talk about it today. It is a percentile-based system. It does have luck points. This is very much an OSR game. If I say OSR, does that mean something to you?
Old school Renaissance, right?
Old school Renaissance, old school rules.
Right.
Dungeon Crawl Classics is very much another example that we talk about a lot.
That nostalgic.
Exactly, that nostalgic feel to it. In this one, rather than the nostalgia being for D&D, it's more for Warhammer Fantasy. But it doesn't just have to be that. There are a lot of overlaps in the type and style of play that both of those games had back in the probably early to mid 80s. One of the big instances of things they had in common is kind of a confrontational style of play, often between the game master and the player characters, where they're kind of, the players are out to beat the game master and the game master is out to come up with some kind of challenge that they can't get past.
Yeah.
That kind of play feels like it's definitely an element of this game in the way that things are set up. Not saying it has to be played that way, but I got that feel as I was reading through it. Another thing that is very big in OSR products and that I definitely felt in reading through this is randomness. Pretty much every element of your character creation has a random table for it. Not saying you have to use those random tables every step along the way, but they're there if you want them. So you can choose your ancestry, randomly, whether you're a human, a dwarf, an elf, a gnome, a halfling, or an ogre. And each of those different ancestries have different random traits that can be associated with it to kind of add a little bit of depth of personality to, maybe the town that your character came from. After that, you can pick an archetype, or I believe you can randomly roll for that as well. These include academic, commoner, knave, ranger, socialite, and warrior. If you remember when we talked about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I mentioned how professions kind of replaced classes in that game, and how there were an awful lot of them. That is very much the case here. After you have your ancestry and your archetype, you get to pick a profession. There are 74 professions detailed in this book. And professions have associated with traits and advances. Basically, you have an entire chapter of the book that just talks about all these different professions. And it adds a lot of depth to your character, because you have this combination of your ancestry and your archetype and your profession, and then which traits and advances you took as you were going through it to give you just, well, it's going to be real unlikely that two people sit down at the table with the same kind of character from the get-go, because there are just so many different options there, particularly if you're both using random charts for all of it. After that, it gets into your character's backgrounds, and this has things like, what time of year were they born? Do they have a doom? Where are things going to go horribly wrong? How old are they? Any distinguishing marks they might have, and so on and so forth. Basically, more kind of hooks that you can have for role-playing this character moving forward, and hooks that your GM can latch onto to talk about different things that maybe other characters might notice, or maybe an NPC might do something that appears to tie into your character's doom.
Maybe they have arthritis.
I mean, that is absolutely a possibility and probably on there. There is a comprehensive skill list. This makes up an entire chapter of the book, and those skills have foci. So basically, you might not just be an expert with ranged weapons, but you might be an expert with a particular style of bow. Or
crossbow, or one of the crossbows.
Right, or it doesn't just have to be weapons, though, because we're talking about skills. You might be
maybe
adept at, blacksmithing, but maybe you're very particularly adept at blacksmithing plows.
Right.
So you get a very granular
certain armor
skill
type
system
or something
here.
like that.
After that, there's a system of talents, and another full chapter of this. Talents are basically your feat parallel, if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons. So you've got special tricks that your character can do, usually situationally. And then the last big part of character creation is trappings, and this is your equipment chapter. Again, a whole chapter. It scales. It covers an awful lot of stuff. I think maybe the cheapest thing on the list is firewood, but it goes all the way up to, say, a war machine, right? So you've got just a ton of stuff in here, mounts, lodging, basic supplies, equipment, pretty much, a broad range of things for characters from a broad range of social backgrounds.
A legitimate catalog, it sounds like.
It really is, yeah. After that, the next big chunk of the book is combat. This is a detailed system with an awful lot of different options, but it's also set up in a way that it felt like it would flow pretty quickly when you're actually doing it. So you don't have to, go and pick and choose every option to take every time you're doing something. It's more broken down into a way that once you've got a feel for what your character is going to be doing, you should be able to progress through that reasonably quickly. The system doesn't have hit points. Instead, it has damage levels. And in keeping with that grim and perilous feel, you do have to worry about your character suffering a permanent debilitating injury or debilitating injury. So your character may lose an eye or an ear or suffer a broken bone that's going to take time to set, and maybe it won't set right. There could be penalties for any of these different types of injuries. There's also a section that follows on to this that covers disease and healing from these egregious wounds and environmental hazards. So, what happens if you get struck by lightning or fall into quicksand or trip into a lava pit. And then, of course, also covers poisons. Usually those are kind of ancillary to the disease, right? After that, next big chunk of the book is the Grimoire of Magic. Magic is broken down into divine magic and arcane magic. So whether it's coming from, a deity, basically, or just the very essence of magical energy itself. There's different traditions, there's orders of magic, and just the act of using and learning about magic is inherently dangerous. You get 75 pages of magical rules, spells, traditions, and runic magic, as well as a few other things. After that, again, this is a big book. There's a lot of stuff going on in here. The GM chapter is more than 100 pages. It could easily be its own book all on its own if the publishing philosophy had been, we're going to make a player's book and a GM's book. It easily could have been both, and probably another couple of books too. This GM's chapter has a section that talks about the tone for adventures that you're going to be running that work well with this Zweihänder rules system and the kind of setting that's implicit in it. It talks about rules application and how you might want to customize those. There's a whole chunk of reference charts, and then there's rules for specific circumstances and adventure elements that might come up. After that, there is a 150-page bestiary. Again, could easily have been a book on its own. That's broken down into abyssals, critters, humanoids, mutants, supernatural entities, custom monsters, and then a section on the loot that all of these different creatures might have. Then there's a 30-page sample adventure called A Bitter Harvest, and a 20-page appendix that presents all kinds of worksheets and charts and character sheets that are going to be useful all throughout. This is published by Andrews McNeil Publishing. Like I said earlier, it's about 670 pages. It is spot color, so it's mostly black and white, but there is some kind of beigey, browny, bronzy maybe color that's in here, often as backgrounds on tables and to highlight specific elements. And there are a few full color spreads in here that, including this ad, that kind of complement things throughout. Some very cool art that's in here.
Yeah, I like the theme of it. It's a nice little...
Again, it's grim, it's dark, but here we go. It's, this kind of nice full color spread right there. And it's got a bookmark as well. It is $65. We do have it up here on the shelf at Immortals, or available at immortalsinc.com. And we've got a couple other support books for it as well. If this seems like something that you might want to get into, stop in, take a look through it. Maybe take a look at some of those supporting volumes as well.
Well said, my friend. Hope you are all enjoying your summer. Until next time.
Good gaming.